It's good to have you. Always good to see you. I know that one or two people are having a few connection issues. But what we're going to do today is I got Helene King with us, which is absolutely great. And Helene is going to be sharing to start with, and then I'm gonna come on the end. And I've been fortunate enough to really connect with Helene over these last few months. It's just amazing how some relationships have just come to life, and this is, for us, this is one of them. And it's just so special every time I chat with her, and she's seeing things and has a perspective about things that is really, where I'm at in my walk with the Father. It's really healthy. It's good for me, and it's just great. So I've asked Helene to go first this week. I call her the King of Scotland.
Because it's my last name.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. And so Helene, over to you, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. I wonder if everybody knows what a great privilege it is to connect like this. And I think it's something that many of us are desperately in need of, that we can connect with one another that are hearing the same things. So something I'd really like to share this morning, which I think is vital for our life and for our well-being. And it's something that my kind of personality doesn't always find easy, but I am learning more and more that over the course of years, this practice has become one of the most transformative in my life, that opens me up to God, to life, and to whom I am as a person more than anything else. It was this practice that opened me up to God as a Father. And I believe in this day and hour we desperately need to lay aside the schemes and plans and anxieties of a target-driven life. We're so busy trying to get somewhere that we actually miss the journey. And we miss valuing the people that we're journeying with, or we miss the people that we meet on the way. And we got to the stage sometimes, I think, that we don't even realize that the ever-present God, our Father, is with us the whole time. And so when that begins to happen, we miss the rhythm of life. And as we learn to come into rest and into stillness, we follow the very heartbeat of God. And we find that the rhythm of God is not a march where we walk in step with one another, but it's a dance where we find ourselves being drawn by the allure of the Father's music. And for those of us who are alert and awake, life will soon become an adventure, because being the oldest here, but maybe the youngest on the inside, there's always more to see and experience, for we're always on the borders of two worlds. The world we live in is willing to offer to us a gift of wonder upon wonder if our senses are not dulled. To increase this sensitivity, we need to be able to move out from a complicated modern life to a simplicity of life that leaves room for things to happen. Now, I'm not focusing on the virus or anything like that, but it is teaching me, can I value the moment in which I'm living in right now? See, there's a simple way of living that compels us to find places that we can be alone, and yet we're not alone, because God our Father is always with us. So simplicity, silence, and solitude help us to empty ourselves so that there's more room in our lives for Him. In the book of Hosea, God says through the prophet, listen to this, I will lead you into solitude, and there I will speak to your heart. You see, absence of noise or people is not necessarily peace. Silence is possible for every single one of us, wherever we are in our minds and our hearts, to come into this inner silence we need to make a conscious decision to depart from sound and into silence. And we need to create times of solitude in our own heart where we can journey to meet God. You know, one of my favorite verses in one of the Psalms is, "Be still and know that I am God." And it's in this silence and in the solitude of our own heart that we can journey to meet him there. So this that I'm about to share doesn't take a lot of words, but it's something that is very, very fragile, but it needs to be carefully guarded. Listen, prayer is sitting in the silence until it silences us. It's choosing gratitude until we're grateful. And I've been reading a bit about the Desert Fathers. And what these Desert Fathers taught is if they say very little about God, it's because they know that when they've been close to God's dwelling, silence makes more sense than a lot of words. So I like asking questions, as you all probably know. So a question arose for me was, how can I listen for God and learn to hear God's voice? You see, it's not about what to hear, but how to hear. Let me say that again. It's not about what to hear, but how to hear. In the scriptures, it talks a lot about, be you perfect as your Father is perfect. But you know, the real meaning of that is this: be you whole as your Father is whole. It's not about what to see, but how to see. It's not about what to hear, but how to hear. And one of the people that shows us how to live this life is Jesus Christ. But there's a part of Jesus's life that often gets skipped over in our own lives because there's not an awful lot in the Bible about it. It's tucked away, but it really is worth digging through to find. In Mark 1, listen to this. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went to a solitary place. Luke 4, at daybreak, Jesus went out to a solitary place. Mark 6, after leaving the crowd, Jesus went up a mountain to pray. Matthew 14, Jesus got in a boat by himself to go to a solitary place. Luke 5, Jesus often withdrew to solitary places. What Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God, is looking for is silence. But listen, it's not just external silence, but internal silence. And I think it's very, very important because we can run around so fast that we've no idea how to experience not just external silence, but internal silence. In the book of 1 Kings, we read about Elijah. Elijah was a prophet and he went away to try and find God. Don't we do that? I'll go to the next move of the Holy Spirit there. I'll go to the next move there. That's what we do because we are trying to find God just like Elijah. And the Lord said to Elijah, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for I am about to pass by. Then came a great and powerful wind, but the Lord wasn't in the wind. After the fire, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire came this, a gentle whisper. Some versions of the Bible say a still small voice. And right after Elijah hears this, he covers his face. He didn't cover his face when there was an earthquake and a fire or anything. He covers his face when he hears this still small voice. Elijah was beginning to hear God for the very first time. You see, the Hebrew translation of a still small voice is really a gentle stillness. I believe today there's something greater than a voice that we are longing for, and it's a stillness, a love which goes beyond words. And I've only experienced this very occasionally, but I discovered it was vibrant and full of life. It was really alive. So a gentle stillness has a vibrancy and a life that is far deeper than words. And I believe it's really the deepest need for all our lives. It isn't Bible reading, it's not journaling, it isn't praying, it's just being still. But these practices of Bible reading and journaling and praying are important. But you know, when you look over the course of your life, I realized I was longing for this. So I went to the Jesuits, which was founded by Ignatius of Loyola. I went to a Catholic house of prayer in Edinburgh. I go to a place called Lindisfarne, which is Holy Island, which I'm actually going to in October. I go to Iona, where Celtic spirituality began, up in the north of Scotland. When I went to Cyprus, where I met Jeff, when I retired, what was I really longing for is I want to experience the intimacy of a silence. And all of these people helped me on the journey through life. And every single person that I met, from the Jesuits to the Catholic House of Prayer and everything, said this: you won't find out what you're looking for out there, only from within. This is what the spiritual practice does. You begin to discover who you are. And then the question, what should I do with my life, changes because you find out who you are. And when you find out who you are, you find that there's a dream inside of you. And I know my dream. It's become more and more real to me. But the value of silence is an incredible, powerful practice to find out who God made you to be. Jesus went to a solitary place. You know, I don't have my car anymore because it died on me. But if I drive my car, I noticed something. I turn the radio off. Why? What does what you hear have to do with what you see? You see, and if you accentuate one more than the others, they're not as strong. You know, we've got 5 senses: sight, smell, sound, taste, and touch. But if you accentuate one, the others are not as strong. You turn the radio down so that you can have a more acute sense of presence. This is what the practice of silence does. It turns the inner monologue of the mind down so you can look for signs of God. You know, when I went to Cyprus, I first of all rented a lovely villa, and it had a lovely garden. And one day I was out in the garden and I saw this plant was just dying and all the others weren't, and I didn't understand. So I dug under the ground to find that the owners of the property had put a little pipe under the ground, and periodically throughout the day it would water it, because Cyprus is quite a hot island. This little plant wasn't connected because the plant wasn't connected to it, and so it began to die. And I believe more than anything in this day and hour, we need to be connected to the one that's the source of all life. If we're not connected, we won't be effective. You see, silence is an experience of the heart. It's not a concept or idea of the mind. The mind has no access to the experience of this connection. You see, the mind is beautiful, but the connection of the heart is silence. You know, I often say this, but let me say it again. I kind of like chocolate sometimes, and I could have a discussion on chocolate. I could speak on the history of chocolate, how it's made, scientific talks on your taste buds, pictures of chocolate that you've seen, but until you taste it, you do not know what it's like. taste and know that I am good, the psalm says. There's something that I keep repeating to myself again and again, that I might taste this more than have a mental understanding of it. You see, the only way to find out what you're looking for is not out there, but within, because it's out of the heart the mouth speaks. And I want to read something from Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa, Catholic nun in Calcutta, which Daz very kindly took me one day because I kept talking about Mother Teresa. See if you can listen to what she says. God is the friend of silence. In that silence, he will listen to us. He will speak to our soul, and there we will hear his voice. The fruit of silence is faith. The fruit of faith is prayer. The fruit of prayer is love. The fruit of love is service. The fruit of service is silence. In the silence of the heart, God speaks. If we can learn to face God in prayer and silence, God will speak to you, but his language is often silence. In Father Heart Ministries, I believe there's a small seed being sown because the kingdom of God is like a seed growing quietly until it's ready for the harvest. Things that matter, things of God, come in their own time and have their own rhythm. It's for every one of us as we're gathered here together to learn to hear the rhythm, to listen to the rhythm, and walk with our Father in the rhythm. And sometimes I used to say longingly, oh God, and then one day without any process of reasoning, I found myself saying, oh Father. Oh Father, you're who we want today more than anything else. You see, I wasn't asking for anything. I wasn't asking for healing. I wasn't asking for the power. I wasn't asking for food or anything. The cry that came from my being was Father. And I wonder if this is the cry of the universe. It's not so much what God can give us, but God as our Father is who we want. Mark 6. Come away by yourself to a lonely place and rest a while. You see, I am finding out that God is life, God is light, God is love. And this is what John the disciple spoke about. This is all to do with the condition of our heart. And this determines how we see him and how we see all things. Because God is life. He is life-giving. Now, I'd like to finish with a little meditation. And I'd like, this isn't a rule or anything, but if you want to close your eyes, because I want you to accentuate the one thing, to actually hear the words that I'm going to say. Because it's a meditation on the feminine side of our being, and it's straight out the Bible. So, be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am. Be still and know. Be still. Be. Just be. So all we're asked to do is just be. One little thought as I finish. How to find silence in a busy household. I found this out not very long ago, that Susanna Wesley was the mother of John and Charles Wesley, founders of the Methodist Church. She had 11 children. How could she find silence? What she did, she put her apron over her head. Over her head, she put her apron. And every one of those children knew, shh, Mum's got the apron over her head, because what she was doing was wanting to hear and experience silence and solitude. So shalom, my friends. Amen.
Wow. Wow. Let's just take a few more moments, and there's no need to rush. Let's just take a few moments just being quiet in the presence of God. Well, that was so good. Thank you. Thank you, Helene. What's great about these videos is that the majority of the time we managed to record them. Didn't happen last week because we had a technical hitch, but it's been recorded this week. So you can go back onto YouTube and watch this again. For me, in terms of where I'm at, I need to listen to this again and again and again, because I realize that many of us are actually addicted to noise. And I'm married to this beautiful Swede that is far, far more introverted than what I am. And when we were on our kind of official sabbatical, Gunilla would say to me, well, I'm going to get up in the morning and I don't really want to talk till 11 o'clock. And that's quite a stretch for me. That's like 11 o'clock, it's halfway during the day, Lots of things have happened by then. Gunilla would go and hide in the room and just be alone in silence. And that really, I know I can't give her story, but I know from what I've experienced and what she's told me, that really helped recharge her batteries, and really, God really did something very unique actually in that place. So Helene, thank you so much. I've got a few thoughts that I want to share. I wouldn't necessarily say they were a companion to what you've just shared, but nonetheless, I think, they're important, and I just want to share them and just want to see just how they, how they land. But I think I know what's being said here about silence is something that I think I certainly struggle with it. Something that's developing in me, and I feel like I'm taking baby steps, like really baby steps. For me to sit silently for 15 minutes is good going, but nonetheless, it helps. We grow from that place and we become more comfortable with it. And I thought, just to pick up on one thought there that was said about, it's not what we hear, it's how we hear, or how to hear. And I think a lot of times when we go before God, we want to hear something. We want an answer because we need direction, because we have a project. And it takes away all the possibility of intimacy, of really getting to know God as a father, and really being his beloved. And I think that's really, it's important. I want to look at some verses in Matthew chapter 11. And those of you that have been through A schools have probably heard some of this, or just some perspective on these verses. This is Jesus obviously talking to the disciples. And a lot of times when we view our discipleship, or we view our Christianity, we get this strong sense or urge, I've got to be like Jesus. So we immediately get into this mode, well, I've got to do things exactly like Jesus did. And we miss something. We get into this doing, this doing. I've got to pray for the sick, I've got to preach, I've got to pray and do all these other things to be like Jesus. Yet we miss the fundamental thing that Jesus really is seeking to communicate with us. And that's kind of revealed in these verses. So in verse 25, it says, Jesus says, at that time, Jesus answered and said, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, for you have hidden these things from the wise and prudent, and have revealed them to babes. And of course, that's important for us, childlikeness, that humility of coming before the Father. Even so, Father, for so it seemed good in your sight, all things have been delivered to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, nor does anyone know the Father except the Son, and the one to whom the Son wills to reveal him. So here we see that it's the heart of the Son, the purpose of the Son, the will of the Son, to actually reveal, to show us the Father, which is beautiful. It's very clear there. It's very clear as well in John's Gospel when we read that. But then Jesus gives us this little picture. And of course they were farmers, they understood agriculture, and they had their agricultural systems all in place. And then Jesus says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Now, that is a beautiful invitation, isn't it? Because I don't know how many people I've met that are in ministry, whether they're in full-time ministry or part-time ministry, lay ministry, but they're absolutely worn out. Burnout would probably be a better word to describe it, but they're absolutely worn out. And their perspective is, well, we're doing this for God, we're working for God, we're working in ministry, and they have all these different statements that they use to describe exactly what they're doing. And so Jesus gives, and they probably didn't quite have an understanding of what ministry meant then, but Jesus is given the people, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Then he says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls. Now, rest is really ultimately what we are actually looking for and longing for. We're desiring that, we long for it, but realize that a lot of us have just, it's been elusive. It's not been there. It's not been what we've really found. Rather, we just work harder or do more ministry, or think somehow that we're going to find it in all the minutiae of everything that we're involved in. Yet Jesus says, prior to that, he says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. Now, what we see now in this verse is this is not an invitation for us to be yoked to Jesus. That's not what Jesus' invitation is all about. Rather, this is an invitation to take the same yoke that Jesus has and be yoked to the Father in the same way Jesus was yoked to the Father. And in that context, context of being yoked to the Father, in a similar way that Jesus was yoked to the Father, that we get to learn from Jesus. Our learning is from Jesus, how Jesus lived, how Jesus related to the Father. Our perspective on that has been, well, I've got to learn from Jesus. I've got to do the miracles that he did and do the works that he did. And of course, we're going to do greater works than what he did, etc., etc. So we get into this driven ministry mode to do the stuff that Jesus did, yet we miss the most important thing. And the invitation that Jesus is actually giving us here is that we can learn from his relationship with the Father. We can learn from that union that he had with his Father while living on earth, and particularly here in this ministry role that Jesus has. But we can learn from the union that existed, the relationship that existed between the Father and between Jesus. And it's not always easy for us to grasp, to really understand, because we haven't, if we're honest, we haven't been taught that. We haven't been educated that way in terms of our Christianity. We've been taught about our commitment. We've been taught to do something. We've been taught to be at church. We've been taught to tithe. We've been taught to do all these different things, but we haven't been taught to be connected and unified with the Father as Jesus was unified with the Father, and learn in the context of that relationship. I heard a story that Stephen Hill told, and I thought this was just a pretty amazing story, and it was really interesting what Stephen did. And Stephen tells this story about leading someone to the Lord, and he talks to this individual, shares the gospel with this individual, and then there comes a point when he actually prays with him. I guess, I don't know what prayer we call it, but he prays and he gives his Lord, get saved, whatever we want to call it, but he's born again. He meets with God, encounters God, and he's become alive now in God, etc., etc. And there was a beautiful thing. Then Stephen had this thought, well, I'm not going to tell him anything. I'm going to let him ask me questions. I'm not going to tell him to go and read his Bible. I'm not going to tell him to pray. I'm not going to tell him to do evangelism. I'm not going to tell him to give. I'm not going to tell him to do anything. I'm just going to be a friend with him. And when he asks me something, it's only at that point will I actually share the very thing that he's asking me about. And so this happened. This guy became a Christian. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, they met again. I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks later. And Stephen was, and he was very honest about it. He said in some ways it was a bit of an experiment. And he was kind of intrigued on what was going to happen in this guy's life in this period of time. Is he going to be okay in his Christian walk? Is he going to, etc., etc. But when they met again 2 or 3 weeks later, he discovered that the Father had actually been talking to this young man and been teaching him things. And it was exactly the same way that the Father was actually relating to Jesus. Now, what's interesting for us is that our daughter, we have this daughter who lives in Bath in England. In fact, yesterday she got her first job salary paid job, and she starts in a week on Monday, which is we're absolutely thrilled and over the moon by, which is great. And we're excited about that. But she's in a relationship with this young man. And we weren't sure if this young man was actually a Christian or not. You know, is he, what's his faith with God, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then Hannah started to explain to us some of the things that have actually been happening in his life. And then what proceeded from there was that Hannah started to share with us some of the visions that he'd actually had. I can't remember the specific details of all the vision, but what I found really interesting was that his journey into the kingdom wasn't necessarily a conventional or traditional type of journey into the kingdom, if we can even say that. Rather, God was showing this young man, his name is Sam, God was showing Sam himself through various visions. And Sam had the spiritual aptitude to realize that this was God actually talking to him. And now in his walk with God, he's just waiting for a vision. He's just waiting for God to speak. His heart, in some ways, is being so tender, opened by I would almost say a giftedness just to hear God speak in that way. And that's been the basis of him starting to grow and develop as a believer, which it would certainly have been unconventional, you know, back 30, 40 years ago. We would want to get people read John's gospel, pray once a day, have a prayer, and all these other things that we put. But this young man, I believe, is very simply doing what Jesus did. Jesus was able to see the Father. Jesus was able to hear the Father. And in the context of Jesus' relationship with the Father, through what he saw and through what he heard, he was able to live out the life that the Father had actually intended for him. And to be honest with you, when I first heard about Sam, at first there was a little bit of a question mark, thinking, well, is that okay? Does that work? Even though we preach it and obviously we believe it, but when it happens with someone very close to you, it's really just a blessing to see how it works out. And the beautiful thing of it is I love what Jesus says, because he says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And when I listen to this young man talk, and when I hear his stories, and I hear the stories from Hannah as well, that is eliminated a whole bunch of Christian expectation that would have normally been on his life as a new Christian. And so all the labor and all the heavy work has gone, and he is actually in that, has actually found a rest actually in his heart, which is a beautiful thing. And so when Jesus speaks here, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, he was very simply saying, hey friends, that you can live and walk in the same way that I live and walk. You can be yoked to the Father in the same way that I am yoked to the Father. And in that place, it will, Jesus says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light, is really light. I realize that we're so full of these hidden expectations that are going on the inside of us and around us in our Christian communities, and they're putting so much expectation upon what we should be and how we should do it. And a lot of the time, if we're honest, that is not bringing us life, it's bringing us death. And it's making us more tired than what we actually were in the first place. Well, I guess about 70% of what I just said, I wasn't expecting to say, but I guess that some of you, perhaps it was important for some of you guys to actually hear that. I just want to open up, we've got a bit of time left, and if anybody wants to add anything or something's impacted you by what has been shared this morning, this afternoon, here's an opportunity. So just wave at us, and the young man in Las Vegas can open your mic. Okay. It's not open yet, Dad. Now it's open.
It's open, is it? Thank you, Helen. Thank you. You took us to a very special place, and it was good. Bless you. Two things I've found since I've been on my own for nearly it's coming to 3 years now, I suppose. I do tend to fill the house with sound. I'm not particularly musical, but the sound is almost speech. So that the radio is on, and those of you who know our country know that there's a magazine type program that goes out from 6 till 9 in the morning, and I listen to that. And there are other programs that I listen to. And then it just occurs to me whether I'm wanting to fill the house with noise. And perhaps I need to address that and to pray it and think it through. The other thing is this, that I find my mind, when I try to be quiet and still, gets itself tangled up with all kinds of issues, 99% of which are irrelevant. They're not improper, they're not wrong, but they just get tied up with issues. For example, when I go out for prayer walks, I usually make it a discipline to have a framework of prayer, because I think otherwise I'll be going along the walk and wondering about what I'm seeing and wondering about people that I'm passing and so on. And the only way to kind of discipline myself spiritually or mentally, if you will, is to have some kind of framework. So that I usually use the Lord's Prayer as a framework and extend each of the phrases in there, open them up and fill them up with, use what Jesus said as a starting point and go from there. I'm of that age where changing habits doesn't come very easily, but I think there are things I need to address and perhaps wonder about and reflect on. I don't know if Helene has got any observations, for example.
Go for it, Helene.
One of the things, I know exactly what you're meaning. I think one of the things that I have come to experience is when this keeps going with lots of thoughts, I sometimes stop and I'll look at a tree and all I do is focus on the tree. And I look at the beauty of the tree. I'm not thinking about anything. I am just seeing it. And then sometimes, like very recently, I wanted to touch the tree. And I realized by doing that, I'm using my senses. And then the breeze would come and the leaves would rustle. So I wasn't hearing anything with my mind, but it's like my heart was hearing and seeing and touching in a totally different way. And I'll give you one little thought that a friend of mine's an Episcopal minister in Edinburgh. And I said to him, how do you manage with all these people coming at you with all different things? How do you cope with that? He says, Helene, I picture myself like a tree. And when everything is coming at me, or even our thoughts, I say to myself, this is just the wind, it too will pass. So I think for me, I'm beginning to experience being present just with a flower, you know, or a tree or something like that. And one of the other ways that I often practice, and I use the word rightly, is to practice breathing. But in the West, we breathe so fast that I've learned to breathe very deeply into my belly and out again. That's all I'm concentrating on is my breath. And I realize that as we breathe deeply in and out, the sound of your breath is Yahweh, the Hebrew name for God that Jews couldn't say because it was too holy. So all I heard was my breathing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Somebody else. Deb. Let's just wait for the sound to come on.
I learned, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the term soaking prayer, but soaking prayer is simply sitting in silence. And I went to Toronto, Catch the Fire, and I learned about this, but I ran a soaking prayer center for about 7 years. And one of the things we learned, and if I remember correctly, science that studies the brain says that it takes about 10 to 15 minutes for our brains to calm down. And so people would come to my home and they would say, I can't do it. And so what we suggested was to have a piece of paper and a pen beside you. And when thoughts came to your mind, your to-do list, oh, I didn't make this phone call, I have to do this. We would say to them, just write that down. Whatever it is, just write it down, get it out of here and onto the piece of paper. And if they could make it through that 15 minutes, it was astounding. People could soak for an hour with ease. Also, sometimes, and I know that silence is very important, but we also found that sometimes playing very quiet music in the background, just a little bit of distraction, not with words that you would start singing along with, but just something that was more calming, that helped people to ease into a true place of silence and rest. And what happens to people during that time is really incredible.
Wow. I wonder if I could ask John in Ghana, because John lives in Africa, in the developing world, and one thing that I've seen, we've lived in Ghana and we've been going to Ghana for 30 years, not this year, but almost every year, a few times a year, and it always seems to me like the Ghanaians are more relaxed and more at peace than what the Westerners are, you know? But John, and I know you've got this revelation, it's coming to you. I just wondered if you had any thoughts about this.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Andy. Well, when you were talking, you mentioned a verse in Matthew that talks about come unto me, all ye who labor and are heavily laden, and I'll give you rest. You see, isn't it amazing that most times when we read the Bible, we think that other portion belongs to other people and then some portion belongs to us. It's one scripture that I've read over and over again, and then when you read that, you're thinking about the unbeliever somewhere who needs rest so much without you ever pausing to think that, yeah, maybe God is talking to me, maybe I need this rest. So I think what you mentioned, there, really impacted me. It caused me to begin to reflect, more on that particular verse. That even though we say we do ministry going back and forth, it's possibly we need so much rest than the unbeliever we think out there. So I think this what I got from what you shared, and then it really impacted me. That as we go doing ministry, as we go teaching others, we need to also think about ourselves and then what God is saying to us and then what God wants to do in our hearts. Thank you.
Hey, John, let me just ask another question for you. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but the silence, because what I know about you is you find it very easy just to be in silence for a long period of time.
Yes. Well, I think that the silence bit that Helene shared, I was thinking about that as well. And then it does appear that, temperament could also come into that. It might be easy for people who are, quite introverted, to tilt so much to the silence that Helene was talking about, probably than, the choleric type who, like you said you can't sit for about 15 minutes or something. But then as we draw closer and closer, I think over time it's a journey. And then over time we would learn, to maintain our peace and in silence, even in the midst of the storm. So I think probably, yeah, the temperament bit could be counting here. But as we develop in our journey with him, we'll become more silent, before him, as he works in our hearts.
Thank you. Anybody else? We're all silent. Wow. Wow. Well, that's fine, folks. I think this has given us a lot of food for thought, and it was very good, Helene. Thank you so much for what you shared. We'll do the same call again next week at 4 p.m. UK time, 5 p.m. European time. It's just great having you and being together. Not sure who's going to be on with me next week, but somebody will be, I'm sure. And I'll let you know during the week through our WhatsApp group or our Facebook group that I just send notices out. So God bless you. And we're going to put this video up on our YouTube channel. I think most of you are aware of that, and most of you already actually get to listen to that. So I won't bring it up on the screen today. You know where the website is and the Facebook page is. So thank you, guys. I love you. It's great having you. Thank you again, Helene, and look forward to being with you guys again next week. God bless you.
Hello.